Hello everyone and welcome to round 1 of the 2018 London Chess Classic. It's the final event of the 2018's Grand Chess Tour. And in round 1 we have Fabiano Caruana versus Hikaru Nakamura. And on the other table, Levan Aronian faced off against Vachier-Lagrave. But this is the game that we're interested in as it's Fabiano's chance to overtake Carlsen as world number 1 in live ratings. And also, it's very interesting. This is Fabiano's first game after first classical game after the World Chess Championship match against Magnus Carlsen. And during this game, I think he's not 100 points higher rated than Hikaru, but I don't think it's far from that. I think some 85 points. So it's kind of a lot of pressure on Fabiano here. On the other hand, there's not a lot of pressure on Hikaru here. He doesn't really have anything to prove here. Of course, he would like to prove himself against his fellow countrymen, but other than that, he can only spoil Fabi's attempt to overtake Carlsen as world's number 1. It's a very exciting game, and none of them pull any punches back. It's well, just a crazy one, so I do hope you enjoy it. The entire prize fund for the London Chess Classic 2018 is $300,000, where the first prize is $120,000. So a lot of money for this event, and of course everyone wants to win it. But okay, as Fabi said, he doesn't really care about the money anymore. He just wants to, get results and get that first place. So let's check it out. Fabi has the white pieces and he opens with d4. We have knight to f6, c4, e6, and now knight to f3 and d5. Of course, we transpose into the Queen's Gambit declined. The games are played in the DeepMind Google headquarters in London, but they are always played there for the London Chess Classic. So as far as I know. So I don't know if I mentioned that last year I was covering the games, but okay. Knight to c3, the 3 knights line of the Queen's Gambit declined. We have bishop to e7, bishop to f4, and now castles. This is all still standard theory of the Queen's Gambit declined. e3, we have b6, Hikaru prepares the fianchetto, the light square bishop, queen to c2, and now comes bishop to b7 as planned. Rook to d1. Bishop to d6, challenging the bishop on f4, and now bishop to g3. And here you could capture, but as the old saying goes, to take is a mistake. You don't really gain anything. You just give white a semi-open h-file. And while this is playable, there's really no reason to do this. Yes, you have messed up white's pawn structure on the king side, but with a semi-open h-file, white doesn't really care. He's not gonna castle there. He's gonna just play bishop to d3, put the king on f1, and the king will be perfectly safe there. So after bishop to g3, knight b to d7. Here, I've heard Hikaru mention in an interview he wasn't sure about this idea, but he somewhat recalls that he saw it somewhere. And okay, c captures on d5, we have knight captures on d5, and now e4. Fabi forces a lot of exchanges to create a powerful center. Knight captures on c3, b captures on c3, and now comes bishop captures on g3. We have h captures on g3, and now e5. This is the idea how Hikaru counters this very strong center. And bishop to b5 by Fabi. You don't want to capture here. If you capture, the pawn is protected, but after queen to e7, after the queen attacks it, you're just going to win it. Let's say bishop to c4, captures, and now black is perfectly fine, has a very strong bishop on b7, and after the rooks are developed, black will have perhaps an even better position. But okay, the semi-open h-file will always be dangerous. So after e5, we have bishop to b5. Now c6, provoking this, well, maybe not a weakness, but for now, this bishop will not be so strong. So bishop back to e2 by Fabi, and now comes queen to c7. Here, Hikaru says he was considering either queen to c7 or queen to e7, but he didn't like queen to e7 because this knight could come to h4 and then to f5, and you don't want to weaken your position further by playing g6. So perhaps the queen would be better on c7. And here, Hikaru said that he, nevertheless, even though he played the queen to c7, that he was expecting knight to h4, and that he was even afraid of this if Fabi played it, but Fabi didn't play it. Still, you would have to go back, knight f6, and then after the knight finds this very nice outpost on f5, if you don't want to weaken your structure, you would have to go back with the bishop and challenge the knight this way. But okay, Fabi found a different idea, g4. and Hikaru said that he was actually very happy to see this move. Rook f to e8, Hikaru develops, and even g5 now. Rook 8 to d8, so Fabi grabbed some space on the king side by playing this g4, g5 idea, but Hikaru managed to develop his rooks in that time. King to f1, like we said, Fabi is no longer interested in castling. The king will be perfectly safe on f1, and the rook will be able to use the semi-open h file. b5, and now comes rook to h4. A very nice move. If g3 can be played, maybe king g2, then this rook can come from d1 to h1, and then Fabi can already start a very nice kingside attack. We have a6 by Nakamura, and now comes a4. It's an isolated a pawn. You want to trade it at some point for black's b pawn. We have queen to a5, challenging the a4 pawn, and now comes a move very nice. It really jumpstarts the game. Here Fabi played g6, something I always enjoy. You know, it doesn't matter if you can give up a pawn to make your attack happen just a little bit faster. I always think you should do it, unless you're like completely missing something. But here it actually works nicely. We have g6, and now you have to capture it. You don't want to allow pawn captures or rook captures. It would be just devastating. So h captures on g6, and now comes knight to g5. And here you can already sense what Fabi is going for. The knight has a very nice outpost on g5, the rook is on h4, and the plan is putting this rook to d3 and bringing it over to h3, so this rook can of course deliver checkmate on h8. And there is a very nice way Nakamura can prevent this, but it's not all that clear. The best move here to prevent this plan, rook to d3 to h3, is actually c5. c5 because it opens up the attack from the bishop to the e4 pawn. And now, if you insist in this idea, rook to d3, okay, now knight is defending the e4 pawn, but now you play f6. And there are no tricks with something like rook to h3 to give up the knight, because you no longer control the f7 square. This check, now king escapes, king f7. So after this c5 move, if you insist on this, rook to d3, then f6. You have to move the knight, and then comes g5, kicking the rook back. We have rook to g4, and now e captures on d4. Pawn captures, and now after bishop captures here, black will just win the game, as he wins the exchange. So, after knight to g5, Hikaru didn't find this c5 idea, but rather he played knight to f8, and this is now very dangerous. He allows Fabi to go for his plan. Rook to d3 is played, and now the only way to actually prevent rook to h3 is bishop to c8, not allowing the rook to even come to h3. Queen to b3, now with an attack against the b7 pawn, against the f7 pawn, and here if you block it with the bishop, then the knight will capture it. You will no longer be able to defend the h3 square, and if you go with the knight, then you can go rook to h3 immediately, and again the bishop is no longer guarding the knight. You cannot capture, of course. This will be mate in one. But okay, after queen b3, queen to c7. Now the queen is guarding the f7 pawn. And here we have a very exciting moment where Fabi played a captures on b5. Everyone thought that knight captures on f7 was the idea here, with the plan that after queen captures, rook to h8 check. King has nowhere to go, king has the capture, and now you simply snatch the queen on f7. You win the queen and the game. The problem with this idea is that after you play this knight captures on f7, black will ignore you and simply play bishop to e6 with an attack against the knight and also against the queen. And although you wouldn't blunder the game here, white can still force a draw here. You can't push for more than a draw. You have to go for knight to g5, sacrifice the queen, and then after the bishop finally moves from protecting the h3 square, you can go rook d to h3. And now to defend against this rook to h8 checkmate, first black has to give up a knight, and then after rook captures, you have to start running away with the king. King to f8, and now you get rook to f3 check. And here you have to go back to g8. If you go, you have to go to g8 and allow this perpetual. Again, rook here, rook f3 check, king goes back. If you don't do this, if you instead try to if after captures and the king to f8, rook to f3, you decide to go to d6 and run away, then white will win after rook captures on g7, because king moves, now rook checks, rook blocks, captures, and now even captures on e5. King captures, and now even f4 check. Captures, knight captures with check, forks the king and queen. King captures, and now white is just up too much material, and of course winning. But like we said, white will not be able to to gain more than a draw if he insists on knight captures on f7, so a captures on b5. And okay, we have a captures on b5, and now here again it was a very, very intense moment, but Nakamura, Fabi was very low on the clock. He was, I think, around 6 minutes here, and he has to make 15 more moves to reach time control. Perhaps the most active plan would have been g4 here. Block the bishop's attack on the h3 square, prepare rook to h3, but again, black will probably go knight e6 now. And now after knight captures, pawn captures, rook to h3, black will have a nice plan of escaping here. But still, it would be very dangerous. White could have ideas of pushing c4, going queen to f3 to not allow the king to escape here. It doesn't seem that it would be all that easy for black. But okay, Fabi goes for rook to f3 immediately. Goes now with a triple attack against the f7 pawn, and here bishop to e6. Nakamura defends everything. And now if you go with the idea of knight captures, then you get knight captures, rook f to h3. But now the king immediately starts running away. King to f8. Now you try to provoke, of course, queen to e7 to deliver checkmate, but black will not be fooled. Queen to d6, and now after captures, you can exchange everything with rook h8 check, king moves, captures, and after rook h8 check, king moves, d captures, and now after rook here, captures. The material on the board will be equal, but black's pawn structure is much better here, and black will be better here. So Fabi sees that this is not possible. He has to keep on playing actively. d5. Again, a very nice active move with a pawn. C captures on d5. We have E captures on d5. Here Fabi had only 5 more minutes on the clock to reach time control, and that's 12 more moves. And here comes rook captures on d5. If you go bishop captures on d5, then white will ignore you. Of course, rook is coming to h3, and now white will win the game. So rook captures on d5 had to be played, and now comes knight captures on e6 by Fabi. Another idea you could try is rook to h3, offer the rook here, but then after bishop captures it, white will capture the rook on d5, but then the bishop goes back. Simple as that. And then after knight captures, again, black will have a very nice position, and the king will always have an escape route, even though he doesn't need one now, because there's nothing doubled on the h-file. But again, an interesting idea would have been after this rook captures on d5, again g4, trying to go for this active line. But then again, black will create an escape route for the king, and after rook after h3, immediately start running away with the king, and the king can now go to e7 and d8 and so on, and feel very safe there. So Fabi sees that this will not work, and it requires a lot of calculation, and he does not have any more time on the clock. So knight captures on e6. F captures on e6, and now rook f to h3. Finally, Fabi doubles on the h-file, eliminates black's light square bishop. And here it's again very dangerous. If an idea like c4 and queen to f3 can be executed controlling the f7 square, then again there will be no preventing rook to h8. And here Hikaru planned it out perfectly, and he pretty much blitzed out this e4 move. So now such ideas are no longer possible. The e4 pawn controls the f3 square, and well, white can capture the pawn, and there's really no better move here. If you start with a check, you're not really gaining anything. And if you try something like c4, c4 seems like a very nice move. For example, after pawn captures, bishop captures, you now have a queen and bishop eyeing the king here. And now after the rook moves, let's say rook to d4, you can go rook to h8 check, king to f7, and now after rook to c3, queen is going to e5, and still you don't have any way of making progress here, even though the king is on f7. It seems like it seems amazing that the black king can survive this, but there's no way to continue the attack. It's really a great position. Any checks will be met with rook to e7. The pawn is controlling f3. everything is fine for black here. Pretty amazing. But okay, after e4, rook captures on e4. As Nakamura gave up a pawn, Fabi decided to capture it. There's nothing better here. Rook to a8. Now Nakamura is planning to activate the queen with queen to c5 and bringing the rook over to a3 to perhaps create some threats against the isolated c3 pawn. G3 by Fabi, making some room for the king so the king can come to g2. And now queen to c5. Here Fabi only had 2 minutes on the clock for his next 7 moves. Rook to e3. The rook from e3 is now giving further protection to the c3 pawn, and here Fabi is planning rook to h4 to bring this rook all the way to b4, and this is a very nice plan that Nakamura should have spent some more time perhaps stopping. Nakamura played rook to a3, kicking away Fabi's queen. We have queen to b2, and here Nakamura immediately blitzed out queen to d6. Here Nakamura had some 20-something minutes on the clock, maybe 21 or 22, and Fabi had less than 2 minutes. But perhaps better than this was g5. This was an idea. And here with only a minute and a half on the clock, it's hard to say if Fabi was expecting this. As he prepared rook to h4, of course he checked g5, as it's the only move that prevents rook to h4, but it would be very nice to see what he came up with here with only a minute and a half on the clock. But as we've already seen in the World Chess Championship match against Magnus Carlsen, it doesn't matter how low on time Fabi is, he really does have nerves of steel. But yeah, here after g5 you will have to find a different plan, but then c4 will be an idea. And after rook captures on e3, pawn captures on d5, rook back to c3, queen captures, queen captures, queen captures, pawn captures. You could go for this where you will be up a pawn, but with a shattered pawn structure and with an idea like rook to h5, it doesn't seem like black could do anything, even with a move like g5, so it's hard to say. But with a minute and a half on the clock, who knows what Fabi would come up with. Queen to d6, now rook to h4 immediately by Fabi. Rook to a4 doesn't, Nakamura doesn't want to allow this rook to come to b4 and create threats against the b5 pawn, so he offers an exchange. Rook to a4, rook to e4 now, going after the e6 pawn. And now queen to a3, Nakamura offers a trade. We have captures, captures, and now bishop to g4, threatening the pawn on e6 with check. We have rook to c5, and now comes bishop captures on e6. A knight captures on e6, and now rook captures on e6. So you can see now that the material on the board is completely equal, and it will be very hard to push for anything here. Rook captures on c3 was played, rook captures, and now rook captures on g6. So Hikaru has 2 isolated pawns, but one of them is a pass pawn. Will he be able to use it? It's hard to say. b4 was played, rook to b6, you have to put a rook behind a pass pawn. b3, king to g2, king to f7, bringing the king into the game. F4, and now Nakamura forces matters with g5, sacrifices a pawn to completely ruin white's pawn structure. F captures on g5, rook to c2 check, bringing the pawn all the way to b2. We have king to f3, and now comes pawn to b2. It's very hard, since the white king does not occupy the last rank. You don't have any ideas with check and then bringing this pawn to a queening square. So king to g4. Now comes king to g7, and here we had a repetition of moves. Rook b7 check, king g6, rook b6 check, king g7, rook b7 check, and now comes king to g6. So yeah, a very interesting game, a very attacking game, and Fabi really spent all of his time trying to win this game and overtake Carlsen as a world's #1, but it seems Nakamura would not have it. And also, I don't know if... since Fabiano is almost 100 rating points higher rated than Nakamura, does he lose points here for a draw? I actually think he does, because during the World Chess Championship games, all of the 12 classical games were drawn, so there was no change in classical rating. After the 12 games, the ratings were the same. I think Carlsen was 28-35 and Fabi was 28-32. Yeah, it's a 3-point difference. Yeah, I think Fabi actually lost some points here, but I will have to check. So no change here, no change at the top. It's not really something that I myself am very impressed with. If Carlsen doesn't play for some time now and Fabi continues playing, I mean, there is a very high chance that Fabi will be the new world number one, but I kind of don't think that now that Carlsen retained his title that he even really cares about this. When he starts playing, he's gonna see if he wants to do something about that or not. But yeah, who's to say what's what? So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. A bit of a different style than I know you all want to see more Alpha Zero games. I've seen your comments. You all want more Alpha, and I will show you a couple of more Alpha Zero games. But then we have to, go cold turkey and go back to human chess at some point. There's one more nice tournament coming. Then we will also be having the World Blitz and Rapids in December, and well, at some point I will also start the Capablanca saga. So, that's it for this video. I would like to thank David Walter, William Gould, One Match, Jason Major, and Sean Flynn for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, hopefully with some more interesting content, with some more alpha content, as it seems. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.